Doings of Doyle is sponsored by Belanger Books, home of the best Sherlock Holmes anthologies featuring today's top Sherlockian authors. Belanger Books is the only authorised publisher of Solar Pond's mysteries, continuing the Sherlock Holmes legacy into the 21st century. Visit them today at belangerbooks.com. Welcome to Doings of Doyle, a podcast dedicated to the works of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Professor Challenger, Brigadier Gerard, and of course, Sherlock Holmes. I'm Mark Jones.
And I'm Paul Chapman. And together we'll be exploring Doyle's eclectic bibliography to understand more about the great man's life and work. We'll be discussing his fiction and non-fiction, the well-known and the obscure.
And stopping by Baker Street along the way. You'll find out more at doingsofdoyle.com or follow us at doingsofdoyle.com on Blue Sky. Hello and welcome to episode 69. This episode, Sherlock Holmes contends with a predatory Austrian baron who collects women in The Adventure of the Illustrious Client from 1924. And here's Paul to tell us more.
It is September 1902. Sherlock Holmes is at the height of his fame and professional standing when he is approached by the noted society fixer, Colonel Sir James Damery, who wishes to employ Holmes's knowledge, influence and powers of detection to help prevent the impending marriage of the sinister Baron Adelbert Gruner to Miss Violet de Merville. Damery, however, is not the principal, but simply an agent acting on behalf of a highly placed client who has his own reasons for wanting to prevent the misalliance. Holmes at first demurs in the face of such muddied waters. To have mystery at both ends of a case is too confusing. But his desire to bring down the Austrian murderer, as he terms Gruner, and to prevent a potentially infamous and tragic society scandal proves too strong, and he embarks upon one of the most dangerous cases of his career.
Now, The Illustrious Client was written at a time in Conan Doyle's life when he wrote Sherlock Holmes stories when the mood or the muse took him. Working back from the publication date of November 1924, it was most likely written in late summer or autumn, which would be in a gap between his various spiritualist campaigns. Earlier in 1924, he'd spent several months putting the final touches to his autobiography, Memories and Adventures, which was serialized in the Strand magazine in summer and published in book form in September 1924. In the spring, he'd also written the very charming short story How Watson Learned the Trick for the Queen Mary's Doll's House project. And thereafter, he seems to have spent much of his time in spiritualist writing and lectures. He probably had The Illustrious Client completed by late autumn before he moved on to the third Professor Challenger story, The Land of Mist, which was underway in October 1924. And it's worth saying that there was a particular case in the newspapers around late summer, autumn, which may well have inspired at least part of the writing, but we'll get to that a bit later in this episode. The Illustrious Client was first published in Collier's magazine in the USA in November 1924, but it didn't appear in the UK until the following February and March, when it was published in two parts in the Strand magazine. The UK illustrations were by Howard Elcock, who included the very famous image of the news vendor, which suitably adapted and repurposed has appeared in the Sherlock Holmes Journal for several decades. And when it came to the collection, the casebook of Sherlock Holmes, The Illustrious Client was included as the first story, despite not being the first published. And that perhaps reflected Conan Doyle's affection and high regard for the story. So in 1927, he told the Strand it was not remarkable for plot, but it has a certain quality and moves adequately in lofty circles. And in a letter to John Gore in 1926, he said, "If I were to choose the 6 best Holmes stories, I should certainly include The Adventure of the Illustrious Client." But whatever the case, it's certainly a darker, moodier, more visceral Sherlock Holmes story than the type that we have received before. And it certainly touches on subjects that would have been absolutely beyond the pale in the Sherlock Holmes stories of the 1890s. So there's a distinct sense that time and society has moved on by the time that the casebook appears in print. And at risk of telling this story in reverse order, we're going to deal, I think, first off with the illustrious client, the title itself, and who is intended to be the illustrious client, as it shines a light on so many different aspects of the story as we go through it.
Yeah, I mean, this is in terms of it being a kind of a crime or a mystery story. There is no real mystery in the plot itself.
Mm,
The mystery, such as it is, lies in the identity of the illustrious client himself. As we mentioned in the synopsis, Holmes is initially reluctant because Sir James Damery makes it quite clear early on that he is acting as an agent for another client.
mm,
And Holmes says, lay the facts before me, but I will not commit myself. And Damery understands this, and being kind of a diplomat of sorts.
mm,
He knows exactly. He knows how to conduct this whole thing. So the story is laid out before Holmes, and it doesn't take Holmes long to change his mind because he knows
mm,
pretty quickly he hasn't got mystery at both ends. I mean, he throws out a guess at Damery, and dear me, isn't it a shame that you've revealed that your client is General de Merville, Violet's
mm.
father,
Yeah.
and Damery denies that. Says, oh no, the general is too broken by this affair.
Mm, mm,
He can face the Afghans head on, but this has broken him. And then Holmes works from that who the client is going to be. And people at the time who read the story initially as well will probably work it out pretty
yeah.
quickly that it is King Edward the Seventh
Yes.
himself. And there has been commentary from Sherlockians and so on saying, oh, that Damery has been clumsy in denying. He could have easily said it's de Merville, but Damery is actually far too clever for that. By
Yeah.
denying de Merville, he actually throws out, lets Holmes really guess who it is, and he
Yes.
knows Holmes will then be drawn in by this. So
Yes.
Damery hasn't made a mistake. He's actually, played the game in the right way. Edward the Seventh is the client, but
Mm,
there's more to it than that. Damery, he throws an extra almost puzzle into the mix.
mm,
He says, my client, however, is an old friend, one who has known the general intimately for many years and taken a paternal interest in this young
mm.
girl since she wore short frocks. He cannot see this tragedy consummated without an attempt to stop it. Doyle is using language very carefully here. His client has taken a paternal interest in this young girl
Yeah. Yeah.
since she wore short frocks. There's a definite hint there
Yes.
that Violet is not the daughter of General de Merville, but
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
actually the daughter of the illustrious client himself. And then this is further with the he cannot see this tragedy consummated
Mm, mm,
without an attempt to stop it. The use of that word is very careful because the idea that Gruner and Violet could marry and have a child or children who would then be
mm,
siblings
mm,
to the reigning monarch
mm.
is just it's absolutely unconscionable.
Yeah. Yeah.
So all that and Holmes works this out very quickly. And knows that he has to become involved in this, and also the chance to nail Gruner,
Yes.
who he's had
Absolutely.
an eye on since Gruner's unfortunate incident with his previous wife, who took an unfortunate tumble, and it's pretty clear that there was no accident
Yeah.
involved there.
Indeed. Indeed.
Mm,
And I think the fact that it is Edward the Seventh, which I think we can be fairly clear
mm,
on, links us into something else that's quite peculiar about this story, which is that
mm,
we actually get real world individuals referenced in this
mm,
story for the first time. Right at this beginning, when Sir James Damery comes in and lays out the statement of the case, we also get references to a couple of people, don't we? We get references to one of them is Charlie Peace, who was actually a real burglar,
mm,
a murderer who was executed in 1879, and it could be an early case for Holmes, or maybe a genuine friend because he's referred to my friend Charlie Peace,
mhm,
and our mutual friend Paul John Hall,
mm,
very good British Sherlockian, has suggested that it might have been from Charlie Peace that Sherlock Holmes learned his skills as a cracksman,
mm,
which is a great theory.
mm.
But the other person who's referenced there is Sir George Lewis as well, who again was another fixer, wasn't he?
Mm. Yes, Sir George Lewis was a very well-known society lawyer,
Mm,
and it was his job was to keep cases out of the newspapers and out of the courts
yeah.
as much as possible. And he had a string of notable clients. He was involved in, for instance, the Tranby Croft affair,
Yes.
which was a gambling scandal which did come to court at which had taken place in a country house in Yorkshire.
Mm,
And one of the guests at this event,
yes.
although there's no question of him being involved in any sort of card sharping and so on, but was Edward the Seventh, I
Yeah.
guess,
Yeah.
when he was the Prince of Wales. The game involved was baccarat, which was illegal in
Yes.
itself. We weren't allowed to play baccarat, so
Yeah.
technically the Prince of Wales had been involved in a degree of criminality, but he wasn't involved in the scandal at the heart of it. But Sir George Lewis was one of the lawyers involved in that case,
Mm,
and he was also involved with Oscar Wilde throughout Wilde's career. There's one point where Wilde was being blackmailed by one of the young men he'd taken a fancy to,
mm,
who'd kept one of Wilde's letters, and it was Sir George Lewis who handled that case for
yeah.
Wilde, and managed to keep that one under control. There's always the story when Wilde took the Marquis of Queensberry to trial for libel with the famous card
Mm,
that Queensberry had insulted Wilde in, that Wilde would have done well to consult Sir George Lewis over that.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
Lewis might have advised him not to proceed with the case, and Wilde's career might have been very different had Lewis become involved at that stage. So that was his job. He was
Yeah.
he
Yeah.
like Damery, he's a fixer, but a legal fixer, whereas Damery is a society fixer.
Yeah.
He's the one who handles things socially and as a kind of unaccredited diplomat almost.
Mm, mm.
So this is the world that we're being brought into by Doyle here.
Yeah. Very, very esteemed circles. And
Mm,
Conan Doyle had worked with George Lewis because they served on a committee together in I think it was around 1907,
mm,
8 when he George Lewis was pretty incredulous that George Edelgy
mm.
had been found guilty and so served on a committee with Conan Doyle. But I do wonder if going back to this the timing of the writing of this between these kind of spiritualist campaigns, if there's another element that brought George Lewis to mind, which is that George Lewis prosecuted Slade the Medium
Mm.
in 1876, which in itself is a fascinating case because the person who brought evidence that Slade was a fraudulent medium was Ray Lancaster,
Mm.
who of course
Mm.
wrote the book on extinct animals, which is the inspiration for much of the Lost World as well. So we get this. But it's one of the strange things I think that characterizes the Illustrious Client, that it feels very real and very
Mm.
grounded and very murky and unpleasant in a way that actually you kind of haven't really had with Sherlock Holmes stories before this time.
No, it's one that really it feels that there's been a shift into the real world more
Yeah.
with this story compared to some of the others. I mean, take for example, the Speckled Band, and we are in that story in the world of the Gothic romance
Yeah. Yeah.
as much as anything else. Whereas here we're definitely moving in a world which feels real. We've got a client who the readers could identify.
Mm, mm.
We've got real character, real world people
Yes.
named
Yeah.
to give the story a real air of verisimilitude.
Yeah.
And there's another point actually with Edward and the dating of the story.
Mm.
And I mean, this is an unusual story in that way as well, in the fact we've got Watson being very,
Oh, yes.
very
Categorical.
specific
Yeah. Yeah.
about the date this started on September the 3rd, 1902. There's not
Mm.
many Holmes stories you actually you will this isn't one for the chronologists, quite
No.
definitely. But within the story itself, yes, it was first published in 1924. but I think there's internal evidence within the story to say it's supposed to have been written a lot earlier.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, because we have at the start of the story we've got the date given, and then Watson pestering Holmes, can I write this up? Can I write this up?
Yes.
And then you get Watson saying that he'd done this for the 10th time in as many years.
Mm,
You work back from that. If this story is set in 1902, that then takes it to 1912,
yes.
him writing this up, which is we Edward the Seventh. I think George V had come to the throne the year before,
Yeah. Has
and
died.
Holmes
Yeah.
says, the it can't hurt now.
Yes, exactly.
The client
Yeah.
has died, so yes, you're going to be allowed to write it. I mean, you can't help but think, well, maybe Violet's still around, but then again, we've got aliases.
Yeah, we've got
So
aliases.
you got that nice feel there. We've got your historical characters, Doyle's contemporaries named,
Yeah. Yeah.
but then we've got quite obvious aliases.
Yeah.
But yes, this is so you've got this wonderful feel where Holmes's world is really genuinely overlapping, and we're not in that comfortable world Vincent Starrett talks about where it is always
No.
1895, where we're into something very different here, and it's something even more, even compared to stories like the Naval Treaty or the Second Stain. This is, it's gone up a gear.
Yeah, and you said there that the Speckled Band is in the world of Gothic fiction. I think here with the Illustrious Client, we're still in that kind of sort of Victorian sensation fiction
Mm.
realm as well, and Gruner is set up as this particularly unpleasant character who could easily have come out of one of these kind of Wilkie Collins novels.
Mm.
Um, there is another possible literary inspiration, I think, for Gruner, which is the character of Bluebeard from the French folk tales. So the tales of Bluebeard by Charles Perrault in France in towards the end of the 17th century, and Bluebeard there is a nobleman who kills a succession of his wives for their inheritance, and the feature of that story is that he has a kind of forbidden chamber in his
Mm.
house in which he keeps the evidence of his conquests, much in the same way as Gruner has this mysterious lust diary
Mm.
that we hear about as well. And it was a popular story. I think Anatole France, who wrote some detective novels, he wrote a version of it. I think in the 1910s or 20s. But Harry Clarke, the great
Mm.
illustrator, had a fantastic image of Bluebeard. There's a wonderful one by Heath Robinson from the early 1920s as well. So I think that could be a possible inspiration on Gruner himself.
And you've got that, yeah, it ties in historically as well. The Bluebeard, one of the characters who helped influence us in history is Gilles,
Mm,
the French nobleman who was the right-hand man of Joan of Arc,
mm,
but also one of the most notorious child murderers
yeah.
in history. And that informs. I mean, there's a novel which we know that Doyle had read Là-bas by
Yes.
J.K. Huysmans, in
Yeah.
which the main character is looking into the history of Gilles and Bluebeard. So it's definitely it's in the air at this time as well, and it kind of mixes in with the Gruner thing as well, because the whole thing with the fairy story version is about the current wife. Don't inquire too closely.
Yes.
And this is exactly the warning that Gruner gives Holmes.
Yeah.
Don't inquire too closely into my affairs. It is not a lucky thing to do.
Yeah.
So yeah, that trope is also coming up with Gruner.
Yeah. Yeah. Very much so.
Mm.
So we're now at the point where Holmes, having been taken Sir James Damery's task on board, he goes to see Gruner, and
Mm.
this is a very familiar, I think, for us from the Sherlock Holmes stories, because this is Holmes recounting a battle to Watson. We get Holmes's interpretation. It feels very much like the confrontation with
Mm.
both Moriarty and with Milverton. And of course, Milverton is an interesting one in this respect
Mm.
because in many ways the Illustrious Client is a bit of a reworking of the
Mm.
Milverton case, as we'll come on to as well. But you get this other thing that I think we start to see from this point on, which is that Gruner is revealed to us several times. He's introduced to us by Sir James Damery. He's introduced to us by Holmes's first impressions. We then get Kitty Winter's impressions,
Mm.
and finally we get Watson's impressions. And ultimately, Watson's impressions are the most detailed because finally the narrator is there in front of Gruner. So he's a really fascinating character, and I think the little bit of distance that is created by the fact that this is a reported encounter, just gives us a little bit of mystery around Gruner.
Mm.
Makes it such an interesting way of introducing him as a character.
And it's also, I think, he is quite definitely one of the best villains in the
Yeah.
canon. I would go so far as to say he's probably, even though there is an element of almost pantomime villain, there's also a deep reality
Yeah.
about the character, which you never quite get with Moriarty.
No.
Because we never do meet Moriarty properly. So, and we certainly Watson never meets Moriarty properly. Therefore, as you've just pointed out, we don't meet him properly.
Yeah.
And as Doyle carries on with the canon, you get this improvement in some ways with the great villains, because Milverton is the next step up, and we really, he is a really rounded villain. We know what's driving him, and genuinely sinister in a way that you just you don't get with Moriarty.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Partly because of the nature of his crimes, and then it's built up to Gruner, and Gruner we really do get a very good picture of this character, and there's something very real world about him.
Yeah, he's very dangerous, and you
Mm,
get that sense immediately. And
mm,
of course, that's going to play out in the course of this story.
mm,
But Holmes says, a purring cat who
mm,
thinks he sees prospective mice. Some people's affability is more deadly than the violence of coarser
mm,
souls.
mm,
And later on, well, there's this wonderful moment, isn't there, where Gruner casually mentions the case
mm,
of Lebrun,
mm.
the French detective who was looking into his affairs, who then was mysteriously
Yeah,
attacked.
Pachets of Paris,
Yeah,
yes.
Paches, yeah, attacked in the Montmartre district,
Mm,
and Watson says he sounds dangerous, and Holmes says
mm,
mighty dangerous. I disregard the blusterer,
mm,
but this is the sort of man who says rather less than he means.
mm,
And you have there is such a real sense that Gruner is very, very dangerous right from the outset, which I think makes him a really fascinating villain.
mm. He's in control.
Yeah,
Absolutely in
yes.
control, and he knows what he's doing.
Mm. The other thing I think just worth saying about this encounter with Gruner is that you get the introduction here of this kind of moral ambiguity that sits throughout this story. We're into a very murky world here, and Holmes is not immune to it. It really struck me reading it again that when he goes to confront Gruner, he says, "No one wants to rake up your past and make you unduly uncomfortable. It's over, and you are now in smooth waters. But if you persist in this marriage, you will raise up a swarm of
Mm,
powerful enemies who will never leave you alone until they have made England too hot to hold you."
mm,
And on one level, that's Holmes really, we're going to get you in the end. But at the other end, he's also saying, we're prepared to overlook your crimes. We know that you killed your wife.
mm,
Holmes does not come off this first encounter with Gruner terribly well. I think he is both intellectually and morally defeated to
mm,
some extent in this encounter. And it's one of the things that makes the Illustrious Client so interesting is that you can argue that Holmes is not at the top of his game in this one at all, even though Watson would say it's the supreme moment of his friend's career.
mm. It's the whole thing with this is Holmes has almost met his match.
Yeah,
Because Gruner is yeah, he's enormously clever
yeah,
as well, and difficult to outwit. But there is also that what the section you just read out is very interesting in terms of England and English society attitudes.
mm.
It's the whole thing. I mean, Gruner's already experienced this a bit because he's been barred from Hurlingham in the polo club,
Yes, that's right.
because of his reputation. But there is also that year where you say with Holmes almost dismissing the crime because they've happened on the continent.
Yes, they have. They've
So
not happened in
therefore, they're
Britain.
not within British legal jurisdiction.
Mm,
And no, Holmes, abhors what Gruner's done, and is obviously looking for a way to nail him for that,
mm,
as well as to kind of prevent the marriage going on.
mm.
But there's also, again, it's this Holmes, in that confrontation, there was Gruner talks about Holmes not having one coloured card. You've got a very poor
Yes. Yeah,
hand.
yes.
And
Yeah.
Gruner doesn't actually understand that Holmes holds the king, literally, holds the king. But also with that, Gruner doesn't actually, what we were discussing earlier, if, and I fully believe this, if Violet de Merville is meant to be Edward's daughter,
Mm.
Gruner doesn't know this.
No.
Holmes does.
Yeah, that's right.
Holmes knows that he actually holds the best card in the hand. Gruner has no idea of that. And also, that is the reason why Gruner is not going to be able to marry Violet, because the
Yeah.
society, the upper echelons will close ranks fully
Yes.
against him. And whatever happens, this marriage isn't going to happen. Even if Holmes fails, and Holmes doesn't expect to fail,
Yeah.
the marriage will not happen for
Yes.
exactly that reason. And this is the underlying current of this story, and why it's actually one of the deepest of the Holmes stories, because there is so much subtext
Yes, there
going
is.
on here that is not at any point explained fully.
Mm,
It's there for you, the reader, to work out. And Doyle is giving enough clues, but you can read it in so many ways.
mm.
And a lot of the Holmes stories, although they aren't, none of them are shallow, but
Yeah,
uh, this one has particular depth.
absolutely.
Mm.
The other feature, of course, about Gruner is that he is a foreign nobleman, and there's another foreign nobleman who may well be a very direct
Mm,
literary influence on the character of Baron Gruner, and that's Count Dracula.
mm,
Several people have noticed the similarities between the two characters. In fact, there was an article back in the Sherlock Holmes Journal by Robert 18 Bissang in 2009 called Dracula by Arthur Conan Doyle, in which he argued that the Illustrious Client is a sort of rational version of Dracula, with a foreign count who is
mm,
has ruined an English woman, is threatening to ruin another, and essentially is hunted down by a group of men. And of course, Conan Doyle had written The Sussex Vampire in
mm,
1924 as well. And there are some kind of, more than, I think, superficial connections between the two. I mean, you have Gruner's gleam of teeth between those cruel lips, the aristocratic bearing and all the cruelty of the grave behind it, and his powers of suggestion, or in fact, very specifically, of hypnotism or mesmerism. It's one of the peculiar features, I think. It is stated explicitly by Gruner that he has the powers of hypnotism. He says, "You have heard of post-hypnotic suggestion, Mr. Holmes. Well, you will see how it works, for a man of personality can use hypnotism without any vulgar passes or tomfoolery." And, Conan Doyle has been fascinated with the idea of hypnotism and mesmerism for years. We've covered it in John Barrington Cowles. There's The Parasite. But obviously there are other influences, Svengali and the like as well. But it's one of the peculiar features, I think, of this story that, the implication is that Violet de Merville is under some kind of hypnotic spell. And that doesn't really work for me in this
mm.
story. I think it's much better that he is somebody who's got the powers of persuasion and charm, and he's relying on very human, ordinary characteristics, but he's just, a very dangerous personality, rather than relying on something, hypnotic, which is a bit kind of Fu Manchu for my liking.
Yeah, I'd agree with it. And again, with that, you can't have it both ways with Violet de Merville, as that almost seems to suggest in the story, because the way Doyle writes her is she, when Holmes meets her with Kitty Winter, you get this kind of the clash between the two women, and basically Violet de Merville is almost presented as a sort of ascetic medieval fanatic
Yeah, yeah,
in
that's
her
right.
approach, and that goes against the kind of the easily suggestible easily hypnotized. And
Mm,
as you say, Gruner, he dismisses all the kind of the mummery of hypnotism and the look at my watch and
mm.
all of that side of things, which as you've just mentioned, George de Maurier took
Yes.
to the heights with Svengali or Trilby. With
Yeah.
the character of Svengali, so I think there's an element there, but it's not an overriding element with Gruner. Gruner is a kind of, yes, there is an animal magnetism
Yeah.
side of it. And there is, I think we discussed this in a very early episode of Doings of Doyle with The Winning Shot,
Yes.
with Octavius Gaster, he is a real progenitor
Yeah. Yeah. That's
of
true.
Gruner, a more kind of melodramatic gothic villain,
Yeah.
progenitor to Gruner. And then Gruner is a kind of, it shows how far Doyle's gone as a writer,
Mm,
that he's able to really put this sort of character in the real world convincingly,
mm.
and not, again, the whole pantomimic element is dropped and almost mocked.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. And what about the Dracula connection? Do you buy into that? Do you see the similarities?
I think it can be overstated.
Mm,
I think that there's no, but there's, a lot of the plot elements within Dracula and the plot outline. You'll find that in an awful lot
yeah.
of books and stories of this era.
Mm,
So I think I wouldn't agree with Robert 18 Bisang's
mm.
assessment of this as Dracula rewritten. I think that definitely is
Too
overstating the
much. Mm,
case.
mm.
But you can see elements, and obviously we know Doyle was familiar with Dracula, and he was a friend of Bram Stoker's.
Yeah.
So that's there. And as you've pointed out, also you do have at the same time the Sussex Vampire,
Hmm.
which suggests that Doyle may have reread Dracula
Yeah.
at about this
Yeah.
time, because in Sussex Vampire he makes the deliberate throwaway reference to vampires in Transylvania,
Yeah. Yeah.
which is a very specific Dracula reference. So I think, there could be an element of that in there. I wouldn't dismiss it outright, but
Yeah.
I wouldn't overstate it either. I mean, the other thing, come back what we were just discussing recently, is the Bluebeard element, because
Yeah.
there's a definite Bluebeard element in Dracula. I mean, Stoker was very interested in the legend, and the whole idea, when Jonathan Harker's in Castle Dracula, he's told about locked rooms into which, of
Yeah.
course, you would not want to go.
Yes, indeed.
So that is a very
Yeah.
clear Bluebeard reference. So yeah, there's definite elements in there, but it just needs to be,
Yeah.
you can overstate the case quite.
Yeah, I think the other connection that might well be in there, just as a kind of undercurrent, is just a general throwback to this period of 1890s and the decadent movement
Mm,
again. Thinking about the timing of when Dracula comes out, but also, Gruner is interesting in that he is outwardly cultured. We have the piece we're going to come to about the porcelain and the collections,
mm.
and his appearance is very important, but actually it hides behind it a kind of internal corruption. And
Mm.
there's almost touch of the Dorian Gray about that as well. I think there's almost this kind of echo of the decadent movement, I think, coming back into this story too.
Oh, definitely. That is, and the fact that the story is set in 1902.
Yeah,
We're
exactly.
we're just coming on the back of that with it's an interesting period to set a story like this, because you've got the decadent era has really died out
Yeah,
after the trial of Wilde in 1895, and then there's a slow decline in the decadent worldview, and also 1902 is the year that the Boer War ended.
yes, quite.
So you've got all of that sort of cultural baggage
Yeah,
is there again, and Britain, yes, has come out triumphant at the end of the Boer War, technically, but
yeah, but
it's
very,
something that the country's had to question itself very seriously, and
yeah,
question empire.
yeah,
So all that is again, it's all undercurrent within this story, and again, it's very interesting that you've got Violet's father,
yes,
talking about this kind of military masculinity, Violet's father is he's depicted as, you know, the hero of the Khyber Pass. This will be in the second Afghan War of 1878 to 1880, which is the war in which Watson, of course, received his wound or wounds at the Battle of Maiwand. So you've got this great military hero, and again we're seeing him broken
Yeah.
by what's going on here, and you could perhaps see, you know, the Britain was in a way broken by the Boer War and
Yeah. Yeah.
having
True.
to reassess itself and reassess the kind of the idea of masculinity.
Yeah, and the poor fate of Violet de Merville's father reminded me a bit of Dominic Holden in The Brown
Mm,
Hand, who is another of these great Indian figures.
definitely. Another element to this kind of broken or alternative masculinity, which comes out very strongly in this story as well, and it in the unlikely person of Colonel Sir James Damery, who is described in this way, that that large, bluff, honest personality, that broad, clean-shaven face, above all, that pleasant, mellow voice. Frankness shone from his grey Irish eyes, and good humour played round his mobile, smiling lips. His lucent top hat, his dark frock coat, indeed every detail from the pearl pin in the black satin cravat to the lavender spats over the varnished shoes, spoke of the meticulous care in dress for which he was famous. And this is, I mean, he's a curious military figure. I mean, I don't know whether he's still in the army or has
Not with
retired
lavender spats, he's
at the
not.
well at this point. But he's in many ways a sort of an unlikely soldier. One, he's clean
Yeah,
shaven. You'd expect one imagines General de Merville as having a fierce moustache
indeed.
of Lord Kitchener proportions. So you've got that clean shaven, almost kind of Pickwickian
Yeah, yeah, very
look to
much.
him, and then
Yeah.
these dandified rig out, and I mean, obviously you'd expect a soldier to be well turned out in his civvies, and you know, but there's just the pearl pin in the black satin cravat
Yeah.
and the lavender spats to the varnished shoes. I mean, this could be one of Oscar Wilde's
Yeah.
1890s dandies.
This is camp.
In the way he's portrayed. So it's there's that again, a very interesting portrayal of masculinity
Mm,
in a strange way. And then when Watson describes Gruner, when he finally meets Gruner in his
mm,
lair, he says this of him: he was certainly a remarkably handsome man. His European reputation for beauty was fully deserved. In figure he was not more than of middle size, but was built upon graceful and active lines. His face was swarthy, almost oriental, with
mm.
large, dark, languorous eyes, which might easily hold an irresistible fascination for women. His hair and moustache were raven black, the latter short, pointed, and carefully waxed. His features were regular and pleasing, save only his straight, thin-lipped mouth. If ever I saw a murderer's mouth, it was there, a cruel, hard gash in the face, compressed, inexorable, and terrible. He was ill-advised to train his moustache away from it, for it was nature's danger signal, set as a warning to his victims. His voice was engaging, and his manners perfect. In age, I should have put him at little over 30, though his record afterwards showed that he was 42.
Mm.
It's an interesting contrast to Damery.
Yeah.
Both dandies, both have these, you know, very pleasing voices. But this is a very Damery who, you know, as a colonel, one presumes is, although he doesn't look at a man of action.
Mm.
Whereas Gruner is portrayed as the more languid, but still coiled and like a
Yeah.
spring as well. So it's interesting to contrast those two characters, and again this dandyism on the back of the 1890s,
Yeah.
and you know, all the style of so many of the decadents, and as I say, Damery could have passed as one of them. So it's a very one of the joys of this story is the fact that it is nothing is kind of fixed in
No,
stone. Nothing is definite here. There's no kind of this is a good guy, this is a bad guy, this is
no.
what a good guy looks. So you've got all. It is this complexity that Doyle is bringing in here.
Yeah, it is. It's the
Mm,
ambiguity in this as
mm.
well. And Holmes has something snarky to say about Gruner's mustache, doesn't he?
Yes, he takes it again catches his attention as it has done Watson's, and Holmes says this of it: the Baron has little waxed tips of hair under his nose, like the short antennae of an insect. So again, yeah, in that short phrase, you've got a lot going. You've got that insect side. This kind of again is
Yeah.
comparing Gruner to something from the animal kingdom. You've also got Holmes. Holmes can't even bring himself to call it a moustache.
No,
I think Holmes is singularly unimpressed.
unimpressed. So we've been talking a bit about how grimy and murky and morally ambiguous this story is, and we're about to be introduced now to a fascinating side character in the Sherlockian canon who kind of sums all of that up, and that's the character of Shinwell Johnson, or Porky Johnson, as we discover he's nicknamed. And it turns out that he's an associate of Holmes from Holmes's later career. Watson has, to this point, not mentioned him before in his stories, but it sort of ties into something that many Sherlockians have talked about, this idea that in the 1920s stories, Conan Doyle starts to introduce a group of people around Holmes, and Shinwell Johnson is one example. Kitty Winter is a kind of witness we're going to encounter. She's less so, but the other one is Langdale Pike, who appears in the Three Gables as well, and this idea that Holmes has a group of people with Watson around him to help him undertake particular cases, and Holmes says of Shinwell Johnson, he may pick up some garbage in the darker recesses of the underworld, for it is down there amid the black roots of crime that we must hunt for this man's secrets. And this is kind of doubly interesting to me because you've got, first of all, the fact that Holmes associates with a criminal. I mean, as much as we know that Shinwell Johnson has sort of turned his back on it, but he's still served 2 terms in Parkhurst and is and made his name as a very dangerous villain. But also, there's a sense here that Holmes now can't go down to the underworld, whereas in the earlier adventures, you may well have seen him donning a disguise and mixing, but maybe he's just too well known at this point. He's just too well established. Um, it's a bit like later Doctor Who stories now, where everybody knows who the Doctor is. He lands on a random planet, and everybody knows who the Doctor is. But maybe Sherlock Holmes is just is too well known. The sense that the kind of mythology of the character is catching up with him now. And but Shinwell Johnson is this really fascinating character because he allows Holmes again to play this kind of morally ambiguous, to play this morally ambiguous streak in this story, which is to use underhand methods. And we know Holmes was quite happy to do breaking and entering, and we're going to see a bit of that in a bit. But this idea that you really need to sink. I mean, Conan Doyle uses the term, to go down amid the black roots of crime, and he says later on that Shinwell Johnson had dived down into what was peculiarly his kingdom. This murkiness that exists. He's an interesting character. Although now I think about it, Holmes might have been better actually bringing in Langdale Pike to help him out on this one, because Langdale Pike could probably have put around some stories about Gruner, which would have made Violet de Merville impossible for her to marry him. But anyway, he goes with Shinwell Johnson, and so we get this. He's an interesting character, I think, to be brought in at this point.
Well, you've got things which tie in nicely with this, with what we've been discussing earlier as well. I mean, where we meet, as we're about to, Kitty Winter,
Mm.
and she gives her address as Hell, London,
Yeah.
which is wonderful, and it's got that whole thing with I've mentioned là-bas by
Yes.
Huysmans, which has been variously translated as down there or
Down
lower
there.
depths.
Mm.
So this is exactly what we're talking about here. And the other thing with Johnson, which strikes me, is this again lovely contrast with Damery,
Yeah.
is that
Yeah.
Johnson is this character at the lower end,
Yes. Yeah.
and Damery is kind of similar job
Mm.
to the top end of society, where he will be grubbing about amongst all sorts of secrets and unsavory aspects of life going on upstairs, and
Mm.
Johnson is the equivalent downstairs. So I think there's just this lovely contrast with Holmes and Watson between the two.
Yeah. It's funny you should say that contrast between upstairs and
Oh
downstairs.
yes, with
Because
Damery.
because Damery is played by David Langton from Upstairs
Yes,
Downstairs in the Granada series.
that was not deliberate.
But yeah, you're right. And Kitty
Mm,
Winter herself is a really interesting character. So
mm,
poor old Kitty Winter. I mean, gosh, we have no idea what this woman's backstory
mm,
is, but it's clear that, her life has been completely ruined.
mm.
I think in the Granada series they say that she was a artist model, I think.
Yes, yeah,
But
because
she says very explicitly she was a respectable artist
yes,
model.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think in that we're meant to think that because she's so flame haired that oh this is a pre-Raphaelite model
Yeah, absolutely.
basically, and that Gruner's latched onto her and you ruined her.
Yeah. And
Mm,
and that, the flame hair is so important. I mean, her first
mm,
description is as a brand, a
mm,
red flame.
mm,
He says, um, beside Johnson on the settee was a brand which he had brought up
mm,
in the shape of a slim, flame-like young woman with a
mm,
pale, intense face, youthful, and yet so worn with sin and sorrow
mm,
that one read the terrible years which had left their leprous mark upon her. I mean, it's
mm,
a terrific description. And
mm,
of course,
mm,
that flame thing is going to be really important because the next scene we're going to get is Kitty Winter and Holmes going to see
mm,
Violet de Merville, and you get that wonderful line about the contrast between fire and ice
mm.
in those two personalities. But poor old Kitty Winter, I mean, you wonder what her life was like. I mean, was she, you know, was she just an acquaintance he'd found somewhere who's very innocent, who's now sunk, and is, I think the heavy implication is that, sin and sorrow and leprosy. I mean, she's probably a prostitute working on the streets at this point.
Mm.
Certainly her reputation has been ruined, so she must have had a reputation to defend at some point. So
She's not what Pierre Nordin, or how he characterizes her in his book on Doyle, where he just simply calls her a deplorable prostitute, which which
it's a bit much.
well, it's a bit much, and it's not right. It's a
No, it isn't.
misreading of the character in the story, unfortunately, from
Yeah,
someone who's often perspicacious in his views, but in this one,
yeah.
he's missed the mark.
Yeah, he has. Yeah, and poor old, and it's interesting because she's a character who is often in Sherlockian fandom paired with people like Irene Adler.
Mm,
Because she is a really strong female character in this. I mean,
mm,
she's undoubtedly Conan Doyle is not great on writing female characters on the
mm,
whole, and this is a really rich one. But again, it's visceral. It's
mm.
it feels very honest and contemporary in a way that actually some other characters may not. So yeah, I think Kitty Winter is a really tragic figure in all of this,
Mm.
and a brilliant piece of writing.
Yeah, and part of that realism to the character, and the kind of the three-dimensionality.
Mm.
You almost feel her as a broken down courtesan,
Mm.
and somebody who might have been again in that circle of our old friend Edward the Seventh.
Yeah, easily.
And there may be an actual reference. I might be reading too much in here, but there may be an actual reference that Doyle's throwing in here. Because one of Edward's many mistresses was one of the most famous of the courtesans, Catherine Walters, who was
Mm.
nicknamed was Skittles. She moved through the aristocracy, and she spelt Catherine. It was with a C usually, but sometimes with a K, and she did use the name Kitty,
Ha ha ha.
and she sometimes signed herself Kitty or KW.
KW. Yeah.
So Doyle again may have known about this, and this is another little clue thrown in
Yeah.
as to who the illustrious client is, and a little in joke
Yeah.
for those in the know, because yeah, I think we have this view that's put across as the Strand magazine, the magazine for the middle class, and all this kind of thing. But there's plenty of people
Oh,
upstairs would have been reading it as well, and maybe this is a little joke that's directed that they would get.
yeah.
Mm,
I think that's entirely
mm,
plausible.
mm,
I mean, yeah, entirely plausible. So Holmes now takes Kitty Winter to see Violet de Merville. They go to the de Merville house, which is in
mm,
Berkeley Square.
mhm,
I did think it was interesting. He lived at Berkeley Square. Berkeley Square has one of London's most haunted houses, or supposedly
mhm,
one of. And I think actually the Spiritualist Association was based there, or had an
mm.
association with it at some point as well.
I mean, Mag's brothers, the book dealer, had it at one point. I don't know if they still do, but they
Yeah.
certainly had that as well. Um, and there's another denizen of Berkeley Square, just this is Bertie Wooster,
Yes, of course.
also
Yeah, yeah.
lives there
Yeah, well, yeah. There we go.
at a
That
different level.
different level. Yeah. Because Churchill lived there, didn't they? Well, the Churchill family did. Anyway,
Yes,
they rented an apartment there.
yeah.
Yeah, so they go to see Violet de Merville, and she is the ice to Kitty Winter's
Mm,
fire. In fact, there is an interesting description of Violet de Merville. She is beautiful, but with the ethereal other-world beauty of some fanatic
mm,
whose thoughts are set on high. And this is where you get that reference. I have seen such faces in the pictures of the old masters of the Middle Ages.
mm,
Um, and and this is another of those instances, another encounter that Holmes has where he doesn't come
mm,
off the victor at all in this instance.
mm,
She has been prepped by Baron Gruner. Baron Gruner has done his homework, and Violet de Merville is expecting Sherlock Holmes to turn up or somebody to turn up. But Holmes says, I'm not often eloquent. I use my head, not my heart. But I really did plead with her with all the warmth of words that I could find in my nature. And of course, it doesn't work.
mm. And there's other thing. I mean, it's a fascinating scene, and there are other things going on here. I mean, we've just talked about the pre-Raphaelites and how possibly Kitty, and certainly in the Granada adaptation is almost depicted as a pre-Raphaelite model.
Mm,
But you could also get that from Violet here in the story of this kind of almost pale beauty
yeah, yeah,
of, again, another aspect of the sort of pre-Raphaelite ideal woman.
yeah,
But the other thing that comes out in here, which I don't think gets really talked about much with Violet, you've got this idea of her, as I say, almost as this medieval aesthetic fanatic.
yeah,
And there is this sense to her that she's latched onto Gruner in a way, as he's latched onto her, but she's latched onto him as well, convinced that this is marvelous. I've got this evil man. I will turn him round.
yeah.
That her fanaticism actually wants to turn him around and is convinced that she can do this, and that's why she. So that as we keep saying with it, there's so much bubbling under the surface in this tale.
Yes, yes, she could want to
Mm,
save him.
mm,
Yeah, and so it could, because he's told her everything that
mm,
is awful to be understood. Um, there is a little fleeting reference here as well to some of the arguments that Holmes tries to put to Violet de Merville. He says, I pictured to her the awful position of the woman who only wakes to a man's character after she is his wife, a woman who has to submit to be caressed by bloody hands and lecherous lips, which is a really
mm,
fantastic sentence. But it also reminded me, of course, one of the other things that he was very involved with at this time, and it was, I think, had just passed into law, was the divorce law reform had happened. And of course, that had been a big obsession with him.
mm,
But the this encounter with Violet de Merville does not go well, and Holmes admits, I must plan some fresh opening move, for
mm,
this gambit won't work. But before he gets the opportunity to plot that, something really genuinely shocking happens in the course of the story,
mm,
and that is this murderous attack on Sherlock Holmes,
mm,
which still shocks me whenever I read this.
mm,
And it really does underscore that thing that we were saying earlier about how dangerous Gruner is.
mm,
I mean, he warned Holmes he was going to do this with reference to Lebrun, and it is actually played out. And there are not many characters in the canon who actually are good to their word.
mm,
You get a lot of bluster from the villains, but here is one who actually carries through.
mm,
And it's a pretty vicious attack. Two men with armed sticks beat him at midnight in Regent Street outside the Cafe Royal, and then
mm,
he's taken to Charing Cross
mm,
Hospital, which would have been adjacent to the old Westminster Eye Hospital that Conan Doyle volunteered in when he was
mm.
in private practice, consulting practice in London. Which actually means that Holmes's prostrate body was carried across Trafalgar Square, which is quite the image. That's one that they should have got one of the illustrators to do. But yeah, but
Mm.
that murderous attack on Sherlock Holmes is just so vicious, I think.
It also there's a couple of things really struck me rereading this. One, the fact that you've got Holmes with his single stick expert, so he's able to give an account of himself.
Yes.
And you get the feeling if there'd only been one of them, Holmes would probably come off the better. It was the
Yes.
second man, Watson. The other thing that really struck me is the fact they're well dressed. These aren't
Yes.
street roughs; they're well dressed, and so these are kind of they're either kind of thugs dressed up in nice clothes, or they're a kind of more gentlemanly type of thug. And it's also happening, as you've pointed out, outside the Cafe Royal, Oscar Wilde's
Yeah.
old hangout. So again, we've got this tie-in to that world. It's
Yeah.
a deliberate location. It's right in the heart of fashionable London that this has happened. Hasn't happened down some alley in the East End.
And fashionable thugs this time as well.
Yes.
There you go. A higher class of thugs take out Sherlock Holmes. And of course, Holmes is in a really desperate way when Watson arrives at Baker Street. Sir Leslie Oakshott, the famous surgeon, is in the hall, having looked after Holmes, and they hit on this important idea that they're going to exaggerate Holmes's injuries, but you get a very clear sense that actually they don't need a ton of exaggeration. He's definitely smarting here, and there's more than an echo of the dying detective here, but this time round, Holmes is not in a good way. And it's at this point that Holmes gives Watson a really important task, and he tells him to spend the next 24 hours in an intensive study of Chinese pottery. This because Gruner is a collector, not just of women, but of porcelain. And Holmes knows that he can use this as an opportunity to hook in Gruner. And Watson heads off straight away to a hitherto unmentioned friend of his, Lomax, the sub-librarian at the London Library. And the London Library, for those who don't know, is a private lending library, still exists. It was formed in the 1840s by Thomas Carlyle, one of the great heroes of Conan Doyle, who was really dissatisfied with the British Museum Library because he said it was pokey and it was badly lit and it was too busy and critically it was badly catalogued. That was one of the big criticisms that Carlyle had. Um, by the 1920s, Conan Doyle was a member of the London Library, and in fact, the president was T.S. Eliot, who was another Conan Doyle aficionado. Um, and Conan Doyle actually does reference the library in another of his works. He references it in a duet, which came out in 1899. He says, one could become a member of the London Library with the right to take out 15 books at a time and all the world's literature to draw from. But it's a well-known library to this day, and it's still frequented by writers.
Oh, you'll often see if you look in the acknowledgements for books, you'll often see the London Library and its staff credited.
Mm,
Everyone associates the British Library
yeah,
with London, and the London Library is often overlooked, but it's been a critical resource
yeah,
since its foundation. And to come back to one of our earlier discussions in this particular episode, one particular writer who used it in the 1890s was Bram Stoker.
yeah.
And this was discovered recently by one of the I think development directors at the library doing some research. Found a number of the books that Stoker had been using to research Dracula had got Stoker's penciled notes in them.
Wow,
So we
gosh.
had there's always been this idea that Stoker, like Jonathan Harker in the novel, did his research in the British
British
Museum,
Museum,
the
yeah.
British Library. But no, it appears that his main area of research in London was the London Library. He was sponsored for membership by the novelist Hall Caine, who's one of his close friends, and is actually the dedicatee of Dracula. And Stoker had a 7-year membership, which spanned from 1890 to 1897, which is exactly the years in which he was writing
He was
Dracula.
writing it, yeah.
So yes, the London Library gave birth in many ways to Dracula.
Yeah,
Mm,
fascinating.
mm,
So Watson knuckles down, but clearly he's not a very good researcher because we discover
mm.
later that he didn't realize that Baron Gruner had written a book on this topic and he hadn't read it.
He's only given one book. Lomax gives him, yeah, he could have 15, and Lomax gives him one.
He's off reading his books or his single book to to bone up on the topic, and then suddenly you get he returns to Holmes's side. Holmes gives him this delicate little saucer of deep blue color,
Mm,
um, this the real eggshell pottery of the Ming Dynasty,
mm,
and a really interesting business card to use, which is Dr. Hill Barton,
mm,
369 Half Moon Street. And Hill Barton is something that is a name that we absolutely know the origins for.
mm, mm. Yeah, this goes back to Conan Doyle's youth in Edinburgh,
Mm,
where one of the families that the Doyles were friendly with. We've mentioned them before. Is the Burton family,
mm,
and one of Doyle's closest contemporary friends, William or Willie Burton, who went out to work in Japan. But we're talking here about his father,
yeah.
John Hill Burton,
Mm,
who was the historiographer royal
yes.
for Scotland, and also author of The Book Hunter. He was a manic bibliophile, John Hill Burton. So again, we've got this tie-in to a tie into him and the Burtons, a little nod of the tip of the hat on Doyle's part to these childhood friends, but also the fact that Hill Burton is or was a great book collector.
Yeah.
And you've got
Yeah. More
this
collection.
again. There's so much playfulness
There
in
is.
this way going on in this story, and this is one of them.
Yeah. He had the collection
Mm,
mania in the most acute form, but for books,
absolutely,
as
yes,
indeed we all do. So
yes, I fully understand that.
but yeah, it
Mm,
was John Hill Burton's sister, Mary, and she was a really interesting progressive figure. She was a social reformer, an advocate of women's suffrage and free education. And she got Conan Doyle into Liberton Bank House, and then made arrangements for him to go to Hodder, the prep school for Stonyhurst. So she's really pivotal, actually, in Conan Doyle's early life. Um, but the other reference on that business card that Watson has given is to Half Moon Street, and Half Moon Street is where um, Boswell lived in the 1760s. But really interestingly, it's also where Lola Montez lived,
mm,
who is one of my favorite personalities in history, the mistress of Ludwig the First of
mhm,
Bavaria, who appears in Royal Flash,
mhm,
has
yes.
an affair with Flashman, doesn't she?
Mm,
Um, but also, Sax Rohmer lived on that street.
mm,
And then if you go into fiction, Half Moon Street is the home of Algernon in The Importance of Being Earnest. It's where
mm,
Bulldog Drummond lives.
mm, mm,
It appears in one of the Raffles stories. And since Conan Doyle's time, it's actually where Stephen Maturin lives with his wife Diana in one of the Patrick O'Brien Aubrey Maturin books as well. And Conan Doyle uses the location again in another story in The Retirement of Senior Lambert. Cecil Lambert lives at 138B Half Moon
mm,
Street, which is and maybe this is symbolic. It's right on the edge of St James District. It's not that far from the Ritz, but it's kind of the wrong side of the road. And maybe this we're on these boundaries all the time between
mm,
acceptable and not
mm,
acceptable. And here you're really mixing with the echelons, but you're not quite
mm,
right at the peak.
mm.
So yeah, so it's an interesting business card that for a couple of reasons.
And so Watson heads into the Baron's house. We get some interesting views on it. That the house has been built by a South African gold millionaire,
Yeah.
and it's the architecture is basically Watson. It's basically vulgar. And, So there's that side of thing. You've got this rather ugly, brash,
Yeah,
and also mock medieval exterior.
yeah,
But and then inside you've got the Baron's collection of priceless Chinese porcelain and the really beautiful objects, which are almost out of place
hmm
in this what is this ugly exterior building.
yeah,
But the whole thing with the collection, I mean, we learn this about the Baron straight away from James Damery, that he collects books and pictures. But his obsession is Chinese porcelain, which he has written a book on, which you pointed out Watson didn't choose to take out of the London Library, which might have been a good idea. But it is also this idea about the Baron as collector, and as we'll discuss shortly, as a collector of women as well. But it's
yeah,
this obsessional
yes,
side to his nature, and it's one of these things that can be seen culturally as a harmless thing,
yeah,
or it can be seen as a marker to an obsessional character and a possibly dangerous character, a slightly mad character.
mm,
Hugh Walpole uses this very well in his portrait of a man with red hair, where the mad villain in that Crispin is a collector of many things, but and again Oriental
yeah, yeah,
porcelain and jade is one
yeah,
of them, as well as etchings. So it's this kind of almost a danger signal
yeah. It is.
within a certain type of fiction.
Mm,
Watch out for this character. I mean, he could be harmless, eccentric, but it's also as much a sign of mad and bad.
yeah,
Mm,
yeah. That's right. And Watson's had to bone up to basically
mm,
take on this chap, which, of course, it's pretty clear that Watson, from the narrative, is the only one who doesn't really know what's going on.
mm,
Holmes knows that Watson hasn't got a hope in hell of convincing Baron Gruner, but he only needs 5 minutes. And Gruner, I think, would be a bit suspicious by a medical doctor turning up on his doorstep
mm,
when he knows he's in confrontation with the famous Sherlock Holmes. But there is this kind of, we are reading the narrative as it has been presented by Watson, and I would like to think that Holmes was maybe a bit more upfront with Watson and said,
mm,
you know, I just need you to buy me 5 minutes.
mm,
And Watson said, I'll get you 10. It's that kind of thing, I think. But yes, so we have Watson enters the lion's den and tries his best. And then there is the interruption from outside, and you get into this whole final sequence, which is probably one of the most upsetting and shocking pieces of writing in all of the Sherlock Holmes stories, I think. I mean, Conan Doyle did plenty of gruesome writing in his Gothic work, and you know, Lady Sannox we covered way back in episode 6, and but in a way, this has almost the same level of visceral horror to it as well. And so, as Gruner hears that Holmes is next door, spies him, and then follows him out through the French window, he suddenly is confronted by Kitty Winter, who throws a bottle of vitriol over him.
mm,
And it really is a horrible moment. And then it was done in an instant, and yet I clearly saw it. An arm, a woman's arm, shot out from among the leaves. At the same instant, the Baron uttered a horrible cry, a yell which will always ring in my memory. He clapped his two hands to his face and rushed round the room, beating his head horribly against the walls. Then he fell upon the carpet, rolling and writhing, while scream after scream resounded through the house. Water, for God's sake, water, was his cry. I mean, it's pretty horrible
mm,
stuff, isn't it?
mm.
It really is.
Oh, it's definitely we are again we were talking earlier with back into the kind of the Gothic realm here, but it is, as you say, very graphic.
Yeah.
Again, it's interesting that the adaptations avoid the battering of the head against the wall, because
Yeah,
it's
they
just
do.
just
It's too
going
much. It's too
that bit.
much.
It would be too much to show.
Yeah.
But it's a very, again, very realistic feature of how this man, who a few minutes ago has been totally calm and cool,
Yeah.
it's quite incredible.
And of course, as I said earlier, this is this is the moment where we get the kind of proper description of Gruner because the narrator has finally come face to face with him. And
Mm,
one of the things that's really apparent in that description is he describes Gruner's beauty. You know, he's clearly a beautiful man. And of course, that's a setup
mm,
for what's now happened in terms of the vitriol throwing.
mm.
And that description of the vitriol is really horrific.
And yeah, what Watson describes it, that's the vitriol was eating into his face everywhere, and dripping from the ears and the chin. One eye was already white and glazed, the other was red and inflamed. The features which I had admired a few minutes before were now like some beautiful painting over which the artist has passed a wet and foul sponge. They were blurred, discolored, inhuman, terrible.
Mm.
It's a wonderful piece of description. Again, this where we've been talking about art throughout this. You know, it's a
Mm.
very striking way of writing this man who's physically beautiful, who loves beautiful things,
Yeah.
that has had his features reduced to this.
Mm.
But again, this you earlier, Mark, mentioned the picture of Dorian Gray.
Mm.
And I think, that we're
Yeah,
getting some referencing
we are.
here
Yeah.
that just as when Dorian stabs his own painting
Hmm.
and then is found dead as the hideous, monstrous creature that the painting represented, which is the real Dorian. Here we've got the Baron's soul reflected in his face now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the vitriol has almost allowed the real character
Yes.
to become visible in the face,
Yes.
as well. And I think this is all very, very deliberate on
Yeah.
Conan Doyle's part.
Yeah. I mean, when they do it in Granada, they obviously don't show the face, thank goodness. But
Mm,
but they do show the vitriol being splashed onto Gruner and onto his
eating
portrait
the
on the
painting.
wall, and it's
Mm,
eating the painting away, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah. It's really interesting.
it's a brilliant way of doing that without any need to
Yeah. For the
show.
horror.
Yeah. Mm,
Yeah, that's right. And I mentioned earlier that, I was saying that, there's a case in the papers in August, September 1924 of a vitriol throwing
mm,
case, which was quite well covered. So I do wonder if this was something that, fed into the story on
mm,
account of it would be just the right time for Conan Doyle to have picked it up. It was the case of a woman called Iris Howe, who had become pregnant by a man who'd promised to marry her. He'd gone off with somebody else,
mm,
and he refused to do the honourable thing. And she threw vitriol over
mm,
him, and it also accidentally splashed the woman he was with at the
mm,
time. Um, she was sentenced to 3 years penal servitude, which even then was felt to be quite harsh. But what's interesting is that there were quite a number of letters to the newspaper saying that this really should be reconsidered because
mm,
of the extenuating circumstances of it as well. And those that case runs through August 1924. And it finishes up in September 1924.
mm,
But it's worth saying as well that, vitriol throwing is one of those things that characteristically in the 20th century was presented as a woman's crime.
mm,
And as I was looking into this, the stats don't back that up. Actually, it's
mm,
as much a man's crime as it is a woman's crime. And in fact, it did remind me that in Brighton Rock by Graham Greene, who himself was a Conan Doyle fan,
mm,
had some very rude things to say about Study in Scarlet in the first meeting. But Graham Greene in Brighton Rock has Pinky Brown carrying vitriol, and it's
mm.
actually on account of that Pinky Brown ends up dead at the end of the story.
And then we come to the crux of the matter is the reason Holmes is there. The reason Watson has been sent as a decoy is for Holmes to try and get the Lust Diary,
Yeah.
Baron Gruner's handwritten diary of his conquests and destructions
Mm.
of women across his career. Holmes had been put onto this by Kitty
Yeah.
in their first meeting when she describes one drunken evening with Gruner when she was still his mistress, and talked about it's a book he has, a brown leather book with a lock, and his arms in gold on the outside. I think he was a bit drunk that night, or he would not have shown it to me. It was a beastly book, a book no man, even if he had come from the gutter, could have put together. But it was Adelbert Gruner's book all the same. Souls I have ruined. He could have put that on the outside if he had been so minded.
Mm.
And it's this item that Holmes wants to acquire to show to Violet de Merville.
Yeah.
And as he says to Watson later on, it is his moral character we must destroy in her eyes. And that's why he was breaking and entering at Gruner's, and he actually does secure the book.
Mm.
Um, and it does through, we don't know whether it's through James Damery or through General de Merville or through the king, perhaps,
Mm.
that the book does come into Violet's hands. And we are left with the impression that, well, we know the marriage
Mm.
is announced as being off.
Mm.
Watson says the thing that most people would think, well, surely his injuries would be enough, and say, no, she would love him all the more as a wounded
Yeah.
martyr. And that fits in with the character that we've been
Yes.
fed about her. So again, Holmes shows himself to be an accurate psychologist in that way. It's, this is the only way we can destroy him. It's in his own handwriting. He can't, she can't deny that.
Mm.
So this has been the Holmes's goal throughout
Yeah.
the story.
Yeah. I think there's also a little sad, there are a couple of sad codas to this, actually, this story as well. One of them is what happens to Kitty Winter because she gets
Mm.
prosecuted.
She gets prosecuted but gets off with a light sentence.
That's right. Yeah. Presumably Holmes and Watson don't get prosecuted for
Mm. Well, there's a
impersonation.
there's a beautiful sentence about that at the very close of the story. And this ending, it's very illustrative of the way that the British and the English social system works. Sherlock Holmes was threatened with a prosecution for burglary, but when an object is good and a client is sufficiently illustrious,
Yes.
even the rigid British law becomes human and elastic. My friend has not yet stood in the dock. It's a lovely understated read between the lines.
Isn't it just? Yeah. Yeah. I think the other sad coda though here is one about the state in which Holmes is left.
Mm,
At the end, Watson says that Holmes is very pale and exhausted and says his iron nerves were shocked by the events. And
mm,
it did bring me back to this phrase which we get right at the beginning, that this is the supreme moment of Holmes's career, because this is a very late story. This is
mm,
1902. We know of two other stories I think Watson dates later, which is The Blanched Soldier and The Creeping Man, I think. And we know he retires around about 1903. If you read all the
mm,
stories, that's what it's. I like to think that this is the story that Gruner is the man that breaks Sherlock Holmes. That this is actually such a
mm,
horrifying experience because this has pushed Holmes to extremes in all manner of different ways. He's using Shinwell Johnson. And does he know what Kitty Winter is up to at the
mm,
end? Because I mean, she was there with something underneath her jacket.
mm,
Is he complicit in any way at the end? And
mm,
then there is the horror of what happens to Gruner himself as well. Um, and of course, the fact that his client is ultimately the king.
mm,
You could easily read this as being basically the beginning of the end for Sherlock Holmes,
mm,
which
mm,
again I think just gives more weight to this terrific story.
mm. There might be an element as well with Holmes of to a degree. I've had enough here because
Yeah.
in 1902 we're also talking. This is the year he refused a knighthood.
Yes, indeed.
As well. So again, this is part of the reason why I think he's accepted this case, because you can't insult the king twice twice in a year.
Yeah.
So we'll take this case on. But again, the whole thing, and it's made clear in that last sentence, is so cynical.
Yeah.
There are those who are above the law. I mean, Holmes himself has classed himself as above the law
Yeah.
every
All
now
the
and
way.
again.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think this kind of the way society works, there is an undercurrent going on there.
Yeah.
Supreme moment of my friend's career, as Watson's description of it. In the second stain, he describes that as the crowning glory. I think the
Yes.
crowning glory would have been better for this one, given
Yeah.
the context.
Yeah.
But yeah, there is that kind of I think element of Holmes realizing that he can't do this for much longer,
Yeah.
and this is this case. There is I think Holmes has a sneaking regard for Gruner, which comes out. He's horrified by what Gruner's been up to, and he's horrified by. But there is an almost an admiration
Yes.
for him, which he can't help feeling, and doesn't like himself for it. But and so what happens to Gruner, I think does it does shock him.
Yeah. I mean, the other is that, this may well be the case for which Holmes refuses a knighthood. Because he's just done a service to the crown. It would be very obvious who he'd worked for. But, in which case, you know, is there a bit of disdain for for the king and the person who's behind it?
I think there's always an element of that, and with this, we can go back to one of Holmes's earlier cases, the Beryl Coronet, where
Yes.
we know that in that the Beryl Coronet itself has essentially been pawned by Edward VII when he was Prince of Wales, and in
Yeah.
which he is described by the bank holder as an illustrious client.
Yeah, indeed.
So I think Holmes's cynicism about Edward might have set in early.
Said in early indeed. So that brings us to the end of the Illustrious Client. If you would like to find out more, you can read the show notes at doingsofdoyle.com. And please consider becoming a patron or supporter of the podcast. You can find us at patreon.com/doings of Doyle. So, Paul, we're doing something a little bit different next time, aren't we?
Yes, a format we've not tried before, but it's basically going to be a Q&A session. What do you want to know about Doyle from the chaps who run Doings of Doyle? Yes, it'd be interesting to see what sort of questions we get from you, our lovely audience.
Yes, indeed. So you can submit your questions by social media. You can find us on Blue Sky or on Facebook. Just search for Doings of Doyle there. Or if you'd like to email us, you can email mark@doingsofdoyle.com and we'll compile those questions. And we'll be recording that one early next month, early December. So if you get your questions in by around the 7th or the 8th of December, that will be brilliant. So until then, it's a goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.
Goodbye.
Lavender spats.
Lavender Spats. That should be my drag queen name.
Holmes, I've discovered the identity of our client. It's none other than...
A loyal friend and a chivalrous gentleman. Let that now and forever be enough.